5 years ago, we bought a farm in an area that's named after its hills and dales. Lots of steep ground. The farm had been unloved for many years. In fact, it had been clear-felled in the 1970s and allowed to regrow without any management. And as a result, we get the crappy vegetation that's behind me. Millions of very skinny, very tall saplings, combined with lots of deadfall from the saplings that didn't win the competition. And then the intermediate gaps filled with lantana. Now, if you're from the Northern Hemisphere and you think that lantana is a lovely little flower for the garden, you're wrong. In the Australian climate, it is a raging beast. It's a declared noxious weed and it takes over everything. Smothers and poisons what's under it, and even on this site, grows into trees. So we needed a tractor and a collection of attachments that would firstly work on the steep grades and in tight confines between the saplings, would help us get the deadfall out and to access this bastard lantana. We needed a Ventrac. So this is our 4500P Ventrac, affectionately nicknamed Venny. It's 4500P, so that's just been superseded by a 4520, but there's not too many differences. As a P, it has in here the twin cylinder Kawasaki that's rated to 30-degree slopes in any direction. And the tractor's fitted with the dual tyres that I'm sitting on, and that also allows it to go to 30 degrees and still be stable. Venny currently has about 700 hours on him, and we're putting about 200 hours a year on it. It's in its natural state. It hasn't been washed in 5 years, but it has been serviced religiously. Currently fitted with its scoop and grapple. We'll talk about them a bit later in this video. Now, Ventrac looks a lot different to a conventional tractor. And if it was a 30 horsepower Kubota, for example, it'd be this high and completely unusable on our grades. I have had it mistaken for a ride-on lawnmower, and whilst it can perform that function, it's way beyond a ride-on mower. In fact, the neighbours call it the beast because they've seen what it can do and still keep on working. We picked the Ventrac because of the steep grades and the tight confines between saplings. Yes, we're clearing some saplings legally, and that opens it up, but it's still very easy to get caught. One of the options would have been a Landini instead of Ventrac. They have a lot of advantages, but we just felt they were a little bit too big and maybe a bit pricey for the job. We are very happy with our Ventrac gear. It does have some foibles, some of which shouldn't have happened, but it's great. So looking at Venny here now, the only mechanical PTO is off the front via a belt. And if you think a belt is a wrong thing, think again. We use it with a stump grinder and a tough cut mower. You'll see those a little later too. Having the belt there to slip when the stump grinder hits a rock or the tough cut hits a stump is a real positive. You still get an awful lot of drive out of it. Because we've got the scoop and grapple, we also have the auxiliary hydraulics. They're mounted right here. And because we're clearing scrub, we leave the side covers on. I understand a lot of people take them off and leave them off. We get enough sticks caught in the machine to not want sticks caught in the engine. But it was on taking this cover off that I first encountered one of the two major problems with a Ventrac. And that problem is fasteners. Some way stupidly too tight, and some barely tight at all. Someone on the Ventrac line has got a power-operated nut runner and thinks they know what torque they're doing things up to. They don't. I've proved that in my professional life. You need to sort out these Ventrac fasteners, and it's a problem on all the gear. These were originally cheese head, socket head cap screws. They were done up so tight that one snapped the end off my Allen key. And trying to get a number of them undone actually rounded the hexagon socket. So not only were they, one, way too tight, two, they were of too low a grade to be used as socket heads. I've actually replaced them all with hex heads so I can get a socket on it and there's no problem. But you'll find throughout my little discussion today, the subject of fasteners pops up quite a bit. Let's open the cover. Right. Opening the cover gives us access, not bad, particularly when the side covers are off. Number two problem we encountered was just down in here. It was a coolant leak from a hose where the clamp hadn't been tightened up. Now it's probably a Kawasaki problem, not a Ventrac problem, but that coolant leak went straight down onto the oil pressure switch and shorted it out and threw a low oil pressure alarm. Scared the devil out of me. So eventually, because that clamp is almost impossible to access, we fixed that and it hasn't reoccurred. When you service these things, well, one of the things I didn't appreciate about a low profile tractor is that puts all the grease nipples at a low height too. And I'm a fat older dude. I really don't like crawling around on the floor after grease nipples, but it's a reality. Most of them are reasonably accessible, and I'll show you a little more in a minute. But while I'm here, here's the radiator screen, and it's a necessity, particularly when we're slashing. You'll even see there now, it's got a lot of seeds on it. It's really seed heads from the recent slashing I've been doing. That is the only time I need to worry about temperature on this unit. It's an LED temperature gauge. It sits on 2 bars and never moves until this thing gets clogged. Now there are 2 grease nipples on a Ventrac that are particularly troublesome, one much more than the other. The less difficult one is down there in front of the radiator. There's a Velcroed on vinyl cover to block a gap, stop recirculation around the radiator. The Velcro doesn't really work too well for very long, but you lift the cover and you've got a grease nipple on the drive shaft. Remember, this engine is mounted in reverse to normal. The front of the engine is actually back here and the rear of the engine is up here. That's to get the power takeoff at the front of the machine. Technically it's not a problem, works fine. But in under here is a high-speed drive shaft from the front of the engine to the pump. And that high-speed shaft has 2 grease nipples on it. The one down here, so you take your cover off and you take great care not to catch it on any of the wires near this terminal box. Those wires have tiny little pins, something that you'd probably see on a computer rather than a tractor. If you pull the wire out a little bit because you've got it caught on the cover you're removing, things don't work. Had that problem. So you rotate the engine somehow, usually off the fan, and you get access to that grease nipple. That's fine. Easily greased. But the front nipple is a big problem. Sorry, if you're American, I'm talking about Zerks. Front nipple is also on a uni joint, so you have to rotate the shaft till it points to the side. The manual and Ventrac will tell you to get an extra long hose on your grease gun, and then you can reach the nipple. And that's true. You can reach the nipple. You can touch the nipple with the coupler. But there's insufficient room to go at an angle and push it onto the grease nipple. And that assumes you can actually fit your hand in there to manipulate the coupler. That is the worst feature of a Ventrac. It really needs to be fixed. Now, I have a fix for it. Firstly, for most greasing, I've got a lock-on coupler, and that works fine. I got sick of grease going everywhere because the coupler wasn't perfectly aligned, so I've gone to this, and I'd recommend you do the same. But for that troublesome grease nipple, I swapped that coupler out for this one. I never knew these ones existed. This is a side slide-on coupler. If my finger is the nipple, this thing slides on and locks on like that. It's the only way I've been able to get to that grease nipple, and it works like a charm. This one came from Ventrac, and I've got no complaints other than I've got to do this one first, put the other coupler back on and grease everything else. You have to do that front nipple first. You have to take this off, take these off, lay them down, making care not to lose the spacer washers. Roll up your sleeve and reach in to find that grease nipple. Now the reason you've got to do it first is you don't want to try and do it when the engine's hot. So while we've got the cover open, I'll just mention the air filter on the other side. It's a pain, needs more room. It's very difficult to actually get the cover back on and clipped into place. Usually involves the use of 2 long screwdrivers. It's possible but awkward. It really shouldn't be that awkward. And if you're worried about collecting dust in that air filter, the intake to the air filter housing is actually way back here in the chassis. So it's away from whatever you're doing up the front. And the tyres, these have been great. You know, we've operated these in deep mud, hard dry ground as it is at the moment, loose material, sand. It's fine. The only time we have a problem is loose material, loose surface. We have a lot of it here, particularly when we've taken the lantana out. It leaves a very crappy surface, very friable, with lots of leaf litter. That's fine going up and down it. Going across it, you're going to slide. The machine's rated to 30 degrees, and yes, I've taken it to 30 degrees on a number of times. But sideways, above 22 degrees or so, as an operator, I get nervous. I have been stuck a few times because the machine slid sideways. Not wildly out of control, but in operating it, instead of going straight across the grade, you end up going down it as well. That complicates life. You'll also need to come to grips with the low ground clearance. Because it's a smallish tractor, that low ground clearance isn't as big an issue as you might think. I've been stuck on a rock 3 times here. Twice I've managed to get myself off just by pushing the bucket down, lifting the wheels, putting something under the wheels and driving away. Once I had to ask the neighbours to come and haul me out. That was mowing off the edge of an embankment, and the embankment collapsed. So I maybe would have got out, except I was beyond 30 degrees and I didn't want to risk the engine. So we maintain this beast religiously, primarily because it's too expensive to replace it. It's hydrostatic drive, and I know professionally that you need to look after hydrostatics. Once you get them dirty, once you have a failure, you've got a problem. That failure or dirt can go right through the whole system. So we maintain it religiously. In Australia, that means oil and filter changes every 50 hours. And that's quicker than I would like, but it's the way it is. There's a big sticker under the bonnet. I'm looking here. Australian conditions. They must be much tougher than anywhere else. And incidentally, we don't run the oil that's nominated in the Ventrac manual. that seems to be optimized for cold climate. We use the oils nominated in the Kawasaki manual. For fuel, it's a petrol. We run it on 95 octane. Just runs a bit better, but also matches what the company car runs as well, so that works out fairly well. So we love our Ventrac gear. I'm telling you the problems, but we love it. We bought the right stuff and we have no complaints overall. I would classify this as being good American quality. It's a rugged, robust design that's let down by the last few percent in things like grease nipples and fasteners. Unfortunately, as I said, that problem goes right through all the Ventrac products. But overall, we're very happy with Ventrac. Wouldn't be without Venny here. So here are the key controls that are in front of the operator. There's a throttle here, handbrake here, voltmeter and alarm display. A pretty good instrument panel, PDO control, and over here, one of the key instruments is the inclinometer. I have this programmed for a visual warning at 20 degrees and an audible alarm at 25, because I just want to stay away from 30 degrees. There is a little trick with it. There's 3 little light sensors here that you block with your finger when you want to program it. I'm convinced that dapple shade will also set it off. I've many times been caught with the thing going off, telling me I'm on 60 degree slopes or something crazy. We did fit a ball to the steering wheel. That helps a lot, because when we're operating the levers over here on the right, with my right hand, my left can steer quite thoroughly. There's a couple of other controls down below that are fairly rarely used. On the left hand side, we have a range selector, high and low. We've never been in high. I wouldn't like to try it, and this jars my back enough as it is in low. And down further, we have the weight distribution. It's normally set high at 3 or 4 for the tough cut, and we set it at 0 for the stump grinder. And that assists the front implement in floating. One thing we should have got was an optional horn. We need a horn to just warn each other of what's going on. The battery is actually down under the seat. It lasted 3 years, was an easy replacement, but it's a very tight fitment, so you won't get a bigger battery in. One of the issues with a Ventrac is the lack of storage space. There is over there a glove box, but that's about all it's good for, gloves. So we've actually 3D printed some various things on here. We've got a triple cup holder over there. We've got things hanging off the ROPS for moving an esky, a cooler, chains, wedges and so forth. It just means that you can take all your tools with you as you go. And up here we've got a phone, mobile phone mount. One of the shortcomings here is there's nowhere to put a phone. There's no USB outlet either for charging anything, not even a 12 volt socket outlet. So let's talk about the scoop and the grapple. And this is the configuration that Benny spends most of his time in. We're using the scoop to move lots of stuff, from logs and rocks and the occasional load of dirt. And the grapple is definitely a big advantage with rocks and logs. Essentially it's a powered wheelbarrow, but it saves an awful lot of time and trouble for us. I have to say though, it's not a front end loader. It doesn't dig particularly well, certainly not native soil. And if you've got a settled pile of dirt, it still struggles. You'll probably find you have to put a corner in and then come with the other corner and loosen the pile and then take it out. Probably great for a dumped pile of topsoil, but anything harder, anything with say clay in it, it becomes a problem. The scoop here is at its maximum height. maximum rollback, the grapples at maximum opening. Yes, I'd love it to lift this high, but it doesn't. Tough luck. I do love the new 4520 front end loader though, it looks good. This does what we need. We need to pick up rubbish, logs, firewood, rocks, and move it. We don't need to dump it into a truck. We don't need to dump it into a trailer. We just need it moved around the property. And this is fantastic. My wife is particularly good at this with logs. She'll roll it forward, grab it with the grapple, and carry the log off. It's quite easy once you're a little bit used to it. We've got the optional teeth on it. Wouldn't be without them. This would be very difficult to use without those teeth. Now, unfortunately, in this case, the bucket finishes here, but the tyres are out to here. Yes, that's a problem for us. It's quite common that we're trying to dig a hole or get in between saplings and we're stopped by a sapling hitting a tyre. I could take the outer tyres off, but I'm not willing to lose the stability and traction. This bucket width is primarily for those running single tyres. There is a full width bucket available, but it doesn't come with the grapple, and we would not be without the grapple. This moves so much stuff so easily. And it's still, after 5 years, we've still got paint on it, powder coat. It's all in good nick. We have never had a problem on this machine. And I have to say that even the grease nipples are in reasonable positions. Only issue, we did have to reposition the hoses a little bit here just to keep them off the inner tyres. I see from Ventrac's recent videos that there's a new rock bucket coming. It looks like good attachment, but it won't carry soil, just rocks and logs. So we would even still stay with this. It just works for us. But like all of the attachments, putting it on isn't as easy as they show in the videos. We were warned that it gets easier as the powder coating wears, and that's true. Every one of our attachments requires manual effort to do the final engagement, to actually get it back far enough so that you can lock it in place. This one's not too much of a problem. Anything with wheels on it is, and I include the stump grinder there because it sort of acts like a wheel. We have wheels on our tough cut, and the problem is, as you're trying to come into engagement, the implement's being pushed away. So I've had on occasions to chock the tough cut or brace it against the shed wall to stop that. It's just a pain in the butt, and you have to get used to it. And I'm going to have to make a number of changes during this video, but it's just the way it is. You get used to it. So this is our stump grinder setup. We have the grinding head down here, and it goes up and down, and it goes left and right as you steer the machine left and right. And that's how it sweeps across the stump. Up in here is a convex mirror, and it allows you to look in the mirror and see down to what the cutter head is doing. We started out with the impression that if we cut our saplings low enough to the ground, that they wouldn't regrow. And therefore we wouldn't need to grind. We were wrong. At least 30% regrow. And it had a bad effect on our chainsaws. You know, just cut a couple of stumps low and your chain is gone. It's no longer sharp. A lot of the trees here have so much grit and soil debris in their bark that I can cut at waist height and still get sparks. So cutting at ground level was no longer an option. So we went for the stump grinder. I was always very concerned that this was not robust enough and wouldn't do the job. I was wrong. We have thousands of stumps in now, some quite large, most quite small, but it has worked exceptionally well for 4 years. And on one day, we lost 3 teeth, shattered 2 more, and lost the locking pin off the arm on the stump grinder. To this day, I don't know why. I don't know whether we lost the pin first and the movement shattered the teeth, or the teeth went first and we lost the pin. We had to get this weld repaired, and it's come up all right, but it's not an easy thing to repair in that area. I still don't know what went wrong with the teeth. I'd inspected them that day and they all looked fine. They were all tight and had little wear. So I rotate them a little more now. They have 3 positions they can be used in, but this has lasted for a lot of stumps. It's hit lots of rocks, roots, all sorts of things, and you wouldn't know it looking at the teeth. They're just fine. We recently had some professional stump grinders on site to do some big stumps, and they had a vermeer machine that had a drum that looked almost the same as this and used the same teeth. It also used a belt drive. It had about 5 horsepower more, but it had a lot more weight on it. Yeah. So it was better at the big jobs. But this machine works very well. Using the mirror is a bit tricky because everything's backwards. You know, forwards is backwards and backwards is forwards, but you get used to it. I can only do about 4 hours on this machine. I can't do a full day. I start to make mistakes, and make mistakes, things go horribly wrong. So about 4 hours is my limit. It's taught me a couple of things. It's taught me that, I need to clean the mirror before I use it, and I need to wear my glasses. Without doing either of those things, I can't see what's going on well enough. There is a new version of this machine where the stump grinder is out to the side and doesn't need a mirror. That could work. I've got quite used to this now. I'm not sure how I'd feel about something out to the side. So now to what issues we have had. We've killed a couple of primary belts. That's to be expected. I do want the belts to slip when I hit a rock, and that happens more than I'd like. I'm not happy with the shape of this housing. It is possible for it to suck in either a fist-sized rock or actually the bit of wedge I've cut out when felling a tree, and they jam beautifully right up in here. You can't get to them. Very difficult initially to get them out. I've since learnt that I power this thing hard into the ground and go backwards, and that turns it and frees it up. But there's something wrong with this housing design. It should open up as it goes through, and I think it does the opposite. We also have some grease nipple issues. In here, underneath, the 2 plumber blocks, bearing blocks, pillow blocks, whatever you want to call them. There's standard industrial design, and they're mounted upside down and they hold the main shaft, and they're fine. They do a great job, but they come with grease nipples, and the grease nipples stick down. And when you're grinding a stump, the sawdust, the wood chips collects, and you often don't know what you can't really see what you're doing. You're going by feel and sound, and you're cutting below ground. You do have to cut below ground to stop the stumps regrowing. So where does that put the grease nipples? In the ground. So we lost 2. I thought surely they must have been ripped out. But no, turns out they fell out. The threads were fine. I screwed in new grease nipples, and now I don't grind so far into the ground. But Ventrac, that's a dumb location to have grease nipples. If they've got to be greased, and I don't know that they really need to be greased, but if they do, put a plug in so you can take it out and screw in a nipple for the greasing and replug it. So small stumps with this machine are a snap. Sometimes you can just drop the drum straight onto it, chew it up and move on. Bigger stumps, and they're out about this size, can be a problem because you don't have enough sweep left to right to do the job. So you might cut in on a cusp this way, come around the other side, cut there, go around over here, cut there, and work your way through the stump. It does get boring with big stumps, and it's easy to get distracted until you hit something wrong and everything jumps in the air and you wake yourself back up again. Very important, I've found, to set the weight transfer on the tractor to 0. If you don't, you find this thing bouncing enormous amounts. You've got to try and keep it down, keep as much weight on it as possible to stop it moving up and down. You want the wood, the stump, to give, not the machine. So we've literally done thousands of stumps with this machine, and I've got no dramas with it. Yeah, we've had an occasional issue, but generally it works really, really well. And with a little bit of care, it keeps going fine. We were, before buying it, concerned that it wouldn't be robust enough, and that's proved to be a false concern. It does work, and it does work really well. May take a little bit of time, but for what it is, it's great. And remember, all of our stumps are eucalypt, Australian hardwood. No softwood here, apart from the occasional lantana stump. So this thing has lived a tough life and continues to work really well. So here's the third of our attachments. This is the Mighty Tough Cut. And if ever something was aptly named, this thing is. It's performed beautifully for us. When we're clearing, we slash first, where we can, fell, stump grind, and then we slash again at the end. That means this machine has seen a lot of really tough slashing conditions. It's seen a lot of rocks, it's seen a lot of logs and stumps and all sorts of things hidden in grass that we didn't know were there. It's survived them all. 5 years on, it's still got the same blades and they work fine. Unlike our scoop, this is the full width of the tractor. So wherever this tough cut can go, the tractor can follow. And it's good for anything up to about 1/2 inch eucalypt. Beyond that, nah, get the saw out or the big brush cutter. Now, we originally didn't have these caster wheels, and it was hard to mow at a higher height. It also meant that when you needed to turn, you had to lift the slasher. The casters have been a boon to us, and we should have bought them to start with. We don't have to lift this machine in any condition unless we hit a stump or a rock, and it just makes it easier. And we can set it quite high as it is right now. This is been set for virgin clearing. We've done a completely new area of lantana, and it's worked really well. Problems? Done a couple of belts. Not really a drama. We've bent this support leg because this bolt came loose and dropped the leg on the ground as we were travelling. Now that leg is bent. We can't get it all the way up or all the way out. We did kill a pulley. I really suggest Ventrac should not use sheet metal pulleys. And really, if you're going to, put a weld on both sides, not just weld the sheet metal to the hub on one side only. We've also lost one of the shrouds. It goes around the spindles underneath and protects the grease nipples. Centre shroud is gone. That fairly robust shroud was held on by 2 piddly little tack welds, not up to the name of a tough cut. Another area that needs to be improved. And grease nipples, well, most of them are under the deck. Means you've got to do things here, tip the whole deck over. It takes 2 of us or an engine crane to tilt it back. It's just a pain in the butt. Can we please have grease nipples on the top? It makes it so much easier. So this in itself is a prime example of Ventrac. We weren't sure whether this was going to be robust enough, but it's been spectacular. All of the gear has worked really well. We made the right call with purchasing this gear, irrespective of our concerns. You might not have heard of Ventrac before. I certainly hadn't. They are all around the world. They're primarily an American company now owned by Toro. We get fantastic support through Ventrac Australia. They've always got the parts we need. They get them to us quickly and at a reasonable price. So if you're thinking about this sort of gear, don't be shy. It works damn well, and I can recommend it. I'd say to you though, consider it a jack of all trades. It does a lot of everything, but it's not optimized for any one particular job. If you want to dig a big hole, get an excavator. Don't leave it to a Ventrac. But if you're like us with a property that needs a lot of different things done around it, this is the sort of machine you need.